Close your eyes. Picture it, a figure gliding through the shadows, skin pale as moonlight, lips the color of spilled wine. Beauty that's both eternal and dangerous. We're slipping into the world of the vampire, where beauty isn't just desirable, it's predatory. The Gothic body, pale, sharp, and dripping with seduction. What makes the vampire so irresistible? Eternal youth, timeless beauty, the kind of face that never wrinkles, never sags, never fades. But here's the thing, that craving for eternal youth, it didn't start with the vampire. Humans have been chasing it for thousands of years. In ancient China, emperors swallowed elixirs laced with mercury and gold, chasing immortality and tragically poisoning themselves. Qin Shi Huang was the founder of the Qin dynasty and the first emperor of China, is said to have died from his own elixir of life. He was obsessed with death and the afterlife, which led him to seek out potions from magicians and alchemists, ironically contributing to his early death at the age of 49. And in the Middle Ages, alchemists whispered about the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance said to transform metals into gold and grant everlasting life. Immortality bottled, youth distilled into powder, the very same dream we project onto the vampire's unchanging face. Even Ponce de Leon, the Spanish explorer, sailed through Florida in search of the Fountain of Youth, a mythical spring said to restore vitality. A desperate pilgrimage for fresh skin, smooth flesh, the illusion of eternity. And of course, the legends of Elizabeth Bathory, known as the Blood Countess, who allegedly bathed in the blood of girls to preserve her youth. Whether myth or propaganda, it endures because it plays into the same obsession, beauty frozen in time, stolen from another body. All of these stories, from emperors to explorers, from alchemists to countesses, are really about one thing, our terror of aging, of decay, of death written into our very skin. So when the vampire appears in Gothic literature, pale, ageless, impossibly alluring, it's not a new fantasy. It's the oldest one of all. Scholar Jane M. Kubiesa calls vampiric beauty integral to the neoteric vampire, explaining how their appearance embodies a kind of impossible perfection, a doubling of life and death at once. Think about it. To be forever young, forever alluring, many would be tempted. Would you? That perfection hides something far darker. Picture Victorian England. Gaslit streets, ladies in corsets, men in top hats. A time of strict morality, buttoned-up collars, and a colonial empire that stretched across the globe. Yet beneath the starched lace and stiff collars, desire was stirring, and the fear of its power even more so. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, beauty and danger are inseparable. Dracula's kiss feels like romance, until it pierces the skin. Desire turns deadly. But this kiss, this bite, didn't emerge in a vacuum. It came out of an anxious, trembling society. The new woman was beginning to challenge traditional roles. She demanded education, independence, and sexual freedom. To many Victorians, she was thrilling and terrifying. At the same time, the specter of disease haunted the era. Syphilis spread through cities, whispered about but rarely named. Degeneration theory, the belief that moral corruption and foreign influence could inject the very blood of society, crept into popular thought. And in the fog of Whitechapel, Jack the Ripper's killings stoked fears of predation, lust, and women's vulnerability in the night. So when readers opened Dracula, they weren't just meeting a monster. They were confronting all these terrors, wrapped in one elegant figure. Jonathan Harker's infamous encounter at Castle Dracula is the perfect example. He describes the three vampire women at first as ladies by their dress and manner, but then the mask slips. Their lips are voluptuous, red with high color, and their teeth shine like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. Harker admits he wants them, confessing a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It's intoxicating and horrifying, a Victorian man undone by female desire. And just a few decades earlier, Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla had already pushed the envelope. A beautiful vampire woman preying on another woman. She's holding her hand, gazing with languid and burning eyes, pressing her lips to Laura's cheek. Erotic, dangerous, her hot lips traveled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine, you shall be mine, and you and I are one forever." An echo of the very fears Victorians had about same-sex intimacy, female autonomy, and desire that slipped outside the narrow rules of marriage. Literary critic Misha Kavka puts it neatly. The vampire combines feminine with masculine sexual and emotional characteristics, breaking down boundaries that Victorian society desperately tried to keep intact. That's why the vampire's kiss is so unsettling. It isn't just a kiss, it's infection, invasion, contamination. A thrill that can't be separated from terror. The kiss is invitation, the bite is betrayal, and that paradox, pleasure and peril, is what makes the vampire body so intoxicating. But here's the twist. Those pale, bloodless faces didn't just spring from Gothic imagination. They echoed real beauty trends, trends born from sickness, sanctity, and style. In medieval Europe, pallor wasn't only a sign of frailty, it was tied to holiness. Saints were often described with luminous, bloodless skin, their bodies fading from earthly appetites into something more divine. To look pale was to appear closer to God. By the Renaissance, fairness of skin became a social obsession. A pale complexion marked wealth and nobility, proof that you lived indoors, untouched by the sun that browned laborers in the fields. Women whitened their faces with dangerous lead-based powders, trading health for the illusion of purity. Pallor was status, pallor was power. By the 18th and 19th centuries, illness itself became the beauty ideal. Tuberculosis, also known as consumption, ravaged Europe, wasting away its victims with hollow cheeks, luminous skin, and fever-bright eyes. Deadly, yes, but also disturbingly fashionable. Cultural critic Susan Sontag once observed that consumption lent women a look that was ethereal and otherworldly. Historian Caroline A. Day, in her book Consumptive Chic, shows how society fetishized the consumptive body, praising its fragility as a kind of refinement. Healthy women even imitated the look, powdering their skin whiter, reddening their lips and cheeks to mimic fever's glow. And then, of course, there was fashion. The corset. Now, not every woman was laced into an 18-inch waist. That's more myth than reality. Working women needed support, not suffocation, and their stays were far looser, far more practical. But the image of the fainting lady, pale, breathless, corseted to the point of collapse, took on a life of its own. In paintings, in novels, in caricatures, fragility became the symbol of refinement. To look delicate was to look desirable. Even if most women weren't tight-lacing, the idea of the wasp waist, the swoon, the body made fragile by fashion, seeped into the cultural imagination. Layer illness, fragility, and fashion together, and the vampire emerges fully dressed. Pale skin, dark aristocratic silhouette, a figure cloaked in mourning clothes and elegance. But it's not just the body, it's the clothes that frame it. From Dracula's sweeping black cape to the lace and velvet of modern goth fashion, the vampire silhouette has always screamed mystery and desire. And here's the key: Victorian mourning attire. After a death, strict etiquette demanded months, even years in black. Women veiled their faces with gauzy crepe, wore heavy jet jewelry, and sometimes carried keepsakes made from the hair of the deceased. Dresses were severe, collars high, fabric somber. Grief had a uniform, and it was hauntingly beautiful. Scholar Robin Smith, in her article, Looking Like the Other, The Evolution of Vampire Fashion, traces how this look evolved from mourning clothes into the goth and punk aesthetics we recognize today. She writes, vampires are flexible creatures. Fashion evolves with their stories. Think about that. Fashion for the dead becoming fashion for the undead. And today, the vampire aesthetic lives on. In goth subculture, in high fashion runways, in the smoky eyeliner and blood red lipstick we still associate with danger and allure. And then there were the corpses. Across 18th century Europe, whispers of the dead refusing to stay dead spread like wildfire. The so-called vampire panics gripped villages from Serbia to Poland, from Moravia to Austria. In 1732, Austrian doctor Johannes Flukinger investigated a village in Serbia after locals swore they were being stalked by the dead soldier Arnold Paole. When Paole's grave was opened, the body looked disturbingly intact, skin flushed, blood pooling at the mouth, even nails that appeared to have grown. Flukinger wrote in his official report that the corpse seemed incorruptible with fresh blood. To villagers, it wasn't medicine, it was proof. The dead weren't dead, they were feeding. And this wasn't an isolated case. In New England, well into the 19th century, families who lost members to tuberculosis dug up their relatives, searching for vampires. They found what they thought were signs of feeding: liquid in their chest cavity, blood staining the lips, bodies strangely preserved. One infamous case in Rhode Island in 1892 saw the corpse of Mercy Brown exhumed, and her heart and liver cut out and burned, because neighbors believed she was draining life from the living. But here's what villagers couldn't know. The earth itself was part of the illusion. Bodies buried in cold, damp soil decomposed more slowly. In winter especially, the chill preserved flesh, so when graves were reopened months later, the dead looked disturbingly fresh. Skin clung to the bone, blood pooled at the mouth, and faces seemed almost alive. Medical historian Paul Barber explains that ordinary decomposition can easily mimic the signs of vampirism. Shrunken skin around fingers makes nails look longer. Lips pull back from teeth, creating a ghastly grin. Even the release of gases could make a corpse groan when disturbed. Imagine it. You dig up your neighbor's grave, expecting rot, and instead, you see someone who looks as though they've only just lain down to sleep. To a frightened village, science wasn't an answer. The answer was vampirism. But fascination with a preserved corpse didn't stop in the graveyard. By the 19th century, Victorians had developed an entire culture around beautifying death. Families commissioned post-mortem photographs of the dead, dressed in fine clothes, posed as though asleep or even standing among the living. Scholar Ruby C. Tapia observes that these portraits made the corpse an object of both mourning and aesthetic pleasure, collapsing grief into spectacle. Bodies were staged, made beautiful, frozen in time, eerily echoing the vampire's paradox, the stillness of death disguised as eternal life. And Gothic writers took note. In 1819, John Polidori published The Vampire, where his aristocratic vampire, Lord Ruthven, is described with a deadly hue and brilliant eyes that entrance rather than repel. Death itself becomes seductive. Le Fano's Carmilla painted the vampire as a breathtaking young woman, her beauty heightened by an almost spectral pallor. Readers knew these tropes from the graveyard and the deathbed. Authors only twisted them into living nightmares. The vampire doesn't wrinkle. The vampire doesn't rot. The vampire remains perfect, while the rest of us wither. And then there's the infamous Elizabeth Bathory, the woman history remembers as the Blood Countess. The legend is irresistible. A powerful noblewoman, obsessed with her fading beauty, luring peasant girls to her castle, only to drain them of blood. She is said to have bathed in it, soaked in crimson, convinced it would preserve her youth. The first whisper of this tale didn't appear until more than a century after her death. In 1729, Jesuit scholar Laszlo Terezzi published Tragica Historia, where he described Bathory bathing in virgin's blood. In 1742, historian Matthias Bell repeated the lurid details in his History of Hungary. By then, the myth was fully woven into folklore. Elizabeth as vampire, Elizabeth as monster. But historians now emphasize that the blood-bathing claim doesn't appear in the trial records from 1610 to 1611. What the documentation does show are testimonies given under torture or coercion, rumors spread among servants and nobles, and accusations that multiplied as scandal and fear spread. Elizabeth Bathory was not marginal. She was rich, educated, fluent in Latin, Hungarian, German. After her husband's death, she ran her estates largely on her own. She lent large sums of money to King Matthias II, who later didn't or couldn't repay her. Some historians believe those debts may have spurred or amplified the accusations. When she was arrested, the royal debt was quietly cancelled. To some scholars, including Kimberly L. Craft in Infamous Lady, The True Story of Countess Erzsébet Bathory, and Radu Florescu In Search of Dracula, the bloodbath legend is less fact than fantasy, a gendered fear of powerful women, a mix of political expediency and misogynistic storytelling. These researchers sift through her letters, legal documents, and witness statements to show that Bathory was very real, but the bathing in blood, that's a later invention. Today, we know blood outside the body coagulates quickly, within minutes. It thickens and clots, turning from fluid to gel. So the idea of bathing in warm, liquid blood is physiologically impossible. The legends require not just cruelty and vanity, but a magically preserved blood supply that somehow avoids coagulation and decomposition. Picture it, a woman's pale skin glistening scarlet, beauty drawn from cruelty, youth stolen drop by drop from the young. The image is so haunting, so irresistible, that it survived long after the Countess herself. The myth of Elizabeth Bathory shows us how easily a woman can be transformed into a monster, and how that monster becomes immortal in the Gothic imagination. The vampire's body isn't just beautiful, it's political. In Gothic literature, the body is never neutral. Pale skin, sharp teeth, even the way a vampire moves. Each detail becomes a sign of status, of danger, of desire. Literary scholar Nina Auerbach in Are Vampires Ourselves writes, "Vampires are what we make of them. They reflect the societies that create them." And what those societies often reveal, through the vampire, is the body as a stage for power. Think of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The Count's aristocratic bearing, his wealth, his foreignness, all wrapped in his pale, ageless body, made him both alluring and terrifying to Victorian readers. He wasn't just a monster. He was an embodiment of anxieties about nobility, sexuality, and the foreign other. His body was the threat, strong when it should be decaying, sexual when it should be lifeless. Historian Deborah Harkness, in her work on early modern Europe, The Jewel House, explains how the body was read as a kind of social text. Skin tone and appearance marked class and morality. Fair skin suggested purity and wealth, while darker or marked skin was tied to labor or corruption. When Gothic vampires appeared pale, aristocratic, and impeccably dressed, they exaggerated the hierarchies society already inscribed onto flesh. But here's the darker twist. The vampire's body is also a predator's body. Smooth skin, sharp fangs, hypnotic eyes. Beauty becomes a weapon. Desire itself is dangerous. As scholar Misha Kavka observes in her essay Vampiric Desire, vampires embody sexualities that transgress boundaries, where the body is both seducer and devourer. By the late 20th century, Anne Rice reimagined the vampire body as both sacred and decadent. In Interview with the Vampire, her immortals were gods in flesh, beautiful beyond human measure, yet cursed with eternal hunger. Critics have often described her vampires as living statues or divine corpses, simultaneously transcendent and corrupted. Through Rice, the vampire body became a site of pleasure and torment, reflecting modern fears of decadence, sexuality, and decay. Even in modern vampire stories, the body still marks power. Who rules, who serves, and who's consumed. The vampire body is never just flesh, it's a map of power. So here's the truth about the Gothic body. It's never just beauty. It's beauty that conceals death. Its pallor born of sickness. Its desire sharpened into danger. Its fashion stitched from mourning. The vampire body takes everything we've longed for: eternal youth, fragile refinement, power over others, and twists it into something monstrous. Pale skin once meant sanctity, then nobility, then the chic glow of consumption. In Gothic horror, it becomes the mask of the undead. Mourning clothes meant grief. On the vampire, they become couture for the immortal. All these threads, myth, fashion, illness, legend, power, intertwine in the Gothic body of the vampire. Beauty becomes both shield and weapon, a body so striking it masks its hunger, a corpse so grotesque it enthralls. Here, beauty itself becomes the predator, and perhaps so do we, in our endless hunger for it. Scholar Nina Auerbach reminds us, each age embraces the vampire it needs, and what we need, again and again, is this paradox, that beauty can only last forever if it feeds on someone else. The vampire body is us, our fear, our hunger, our vanity, dressed in black silk and sharpened teeth. The Gothic body is beauty that devours. Join me next week, if you dare.